So if you're a seller on Poshmark, whether it's for 5 months or for 5 years, chances are at one point or another you've received an email like this, which says, case opened for your recent sale, and then it'll give you the name of the item. And if you're anything like me, that email always results in a whole bunch of feelings: anger, frustration, confusion, annoyance, and a whole bunch of other negative feelings. And if you're anything like me, you want to respond and defend your honor as a seller. Now, in this video, I will share with you how I handle Poshmark cases, and I hope that you will find this helpful in the future if you ever have a case opened up against you as a seller. Hi friends, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Veronica, or Veronica mit K. I'm a part-time reseller, primarily on Poshmark, but also on eBay and Mercari. Occasionally, I also send items to ThredUp and The RealReal. And I have been a part-time seller for a little over 2 years now, and in my time as a seller on Poshmark, yes, cases have been opened up against me. And no, it's never been fun. But I also think I've gained some experience from that, and I would like to share that experience with you guys to help you handle your Poshmark cases. Now, I'm not the first one to record a video like that. I'm sure I'm not going to be the last one, but new people constantly come to the platform, both Poshmark and YouTube, looking for advice and looking for recent advice on how to handle a case on Poshmark. So if that's you and if that speaks to you, thank you for clicking on this video and joining me today. Now, I do have a few disclaimers before we get started. Number one, note the title of the video. It's how to handle Poshmark cases. It doesn't say how to win Poshmark cases. Why? Because I cannot guarantee that you will win a case that may have been opened up against you. Related disclaimer, I don't work for Poshmark. I don't know what Poshmark's exact policy is or their exact guideline when it comes to their employees handling cases. Sometimes I don't think Poshmark knows either, because just looking at the variety of cases that people have shared on the internet that have been opened up against them and how Poshmark would respond to them shows that there is a variety of different responses, and Poshmark is not always consistent with that. However, I do believe there are some key rules that I like to follow when a case is opened up against me, and that's what I'm sharing in this video. And just to clarify, this is a video for those of you who lean towards responding to Poshmark cases. I know there are a whole bunch of people who just let Poshmark handle it, who don't respond at all. That's their business policy. Mine is usually to respond, and so that's what this video is based on. Also, another disclaimer, in this video I will primarily address situations in which you feel as a seller that you were wronged by this case that has been opened against you. I'm not necessarily talking about cases where you as a seller messed up, because let's face it, we all mess up sometimes, we're all human, and so it happens. Now, my first tip or piece of advice when a case is opened up against you on Poshmark as a seller, but honestly also as a buyer, is to take a deep breath. That might sound silly, but again, those negative feelings that you may feel when you get that dreaded email or that dreaded notification, don't let those influence what you are going to say if you choose to respond to this case. So before you even open the email or open the notification to see what exactly the issue was that the buyer described, take a deep breath, calm yourself, and don't go into it angry. I think that's a good policy for a lot of situations in life, but remember that, advice number 2, this is a business. Whether you're a hobby seller selling items out of your own closet or a reseller who's doing this full time, when there's an interaction between you as a seller and the buyer on Poshmark, it is a business transaction. And I think it's really important to remember that, to go into this very level-headed and with as little emotional attachment as possible. So my second piece of advice is, remember that this is you representing your business, and your way of communicating should reflect that. My third piece of advice, assess the situation. What is it that the buyer is complaining about? And if it's something that you messed up, just own it and tell Posh to approve the case and take your item back. Like I said, it happens, we're all human. I've had cases where I clearly messed something up, like switch to orders. Happens to the best of us. Poshmark is pretty good about sorting that particular instance out. Whether the buyers go through and ship their respective item to the other buyer after they've been provided a label is a whole different question. I have mentioned that before. I have no luck with that. But again, If it's something that I clearly messed up, then I will own it and tell Poshmark to go ahead and approve the case. That advice also applies if you see the case that has been opened, and if whatever the buyer says does not matter to you, you just don't care, you're fine with taking your item back, you just want your buyer to be happy, then again, just say, Poshmark, please accept this return and have the buyer ship my item back to me. Because chances are the other person will appreciate that, and maybe they'll even come back to your closet in the future. Who knows? Advice or tip number 4 is remember that there is a person on the other end of this, even if they're rude, mean, belligerent, or if they're misrepresenting what happened in this business transaction, they're still a person. And for you as a seller, there is no need to be rude or insulting or get personal in your response, regardless of what they are saying. I will come back to that in a little bit, but I think it's important that as a seller, you represent your business well and you act in a professional manner. So in other words, put on your customer service face or persona. If you don't have a customer service persona, I suggest you get one if you are serious about selling online, because chances are you'll need it sooner or later. My next piece of advice is, even though you're remembering that there's another person at the end of this, do not address your buyer directly. And a lot of people who share information on social media about how to handle cases will, I think, agree with that. You do not address your buyer. You either address Poshmark or you keep it as neutral as you possibly can. Again, you want to be professional. There are exceptions to that. There were situations when I addressed the buyer because I needed more information, because what they were saying did not make sense to me. I will share a little story time at the end of this video with you where it was a situation like that and I did address the buyer just because the whole situation was so bizarre, and it got resolved amicably, I should say, but I will save that for the end of this video. There will be a little story time. Now, let's pause real quick and go over some common scenarios that you may encounter and what my recommendation is on how to handle them. Now, I think one of the most common situations is that a buyer opens a case for fit and claims that the item was in some way misrepresented, that it doesn't fit them, and they would like to return it. And yes, it's true, Poshmark does not allow returns for fit. It's in their policy. However, I personally would not say that in my response. And you may disagree with me, and that's fine. The reason why I would not say that in my response is because I'm not there to tell Poshmark how to do their job. I know it's tempting sometimes, but again, that is not my place. What I would say instead is I would, again, keep it very neutral, not address the buyer. I would stick to the facts. So in my case, I would say the size was accurately represented in my description, in the listing, in the size field. There was a picture of the size tag, and I listed measurements, because I list measurements for pretty much all my listings with the exception of swimwear, lingerie, and kids items. So my main point is, if the buyer argues that you misrepresented your item, you want to show Poshmark as much evidence as possible to show that you represented your item correctly. Some buyers might say this item doesn't fit, it runs small, it runs large. I try to avoid language like that in my listings because it's not for me to say whether it runs small or runs large. There are different proportions of different bodies, different brands have different sizing conventions, and ultimately I will represent the item to the best of my knowledge, and that includes measurements. If I notice that the measurements are completely off from what a size, let's say medium, usually measures for that type of item, I will state that the item appears to run either large or small. But I generally try to stay away from that because I feel like it's so subjective. I've also seen a lot of cases open for, the color of an item being inaccurately represented. I've never had that. My advice would be to state that different screens might portray color differently, that the color was described to the best of your knowledge, point out the terminology that you use to describe the color of the item. Sometimes I have items where the cover photo doesn't accurately represent the color, but close-ups do, and then I will put that in my listing and say, these pictures represent the color best, it just does not come across in the cover photo. So again, you want to make sure that when you're writing your listing description, that you represent your item as accurately as possible to avoid having cases opened up against you later on. You may also get a case opened against you for flaws in your item. Again, I'm operating under the assumption here that if your item had flaws, that you noted them in your listing. And if that's the case, then you can point that out in your response and you can say, this item was described accurately, flaws were stated here and shown in this picture. Just stick to the facts and do not address the buyer. Just keep it short and to the point. Flaws may include stains or broken zippers, missing buttons. Again, look your item over as best as you possibly can under really bright lighting and point out any flaws that your item might have. But also if it's something like, the buyer claims the zipper is broken, I usually have a picture in my listing of the zipper all the way zipped up on a dress, for example. And if it is on my dress form, then I can show that I had to zip it up and unzip it to get it on the dress form, and you can clearly see that the zipper was working. So things like that can be tricky. So the more pictures you have of those details on items, the better. So when I have a button-down blouse, I will usually make sure to get a picture of all the buttons buttoned up, buttons on the cuffs, etc., just to make sure. Of course, there are also cases that are opened up because an item is not authentic. I will refer to other people on that subject because I really don't sell anything high-end, and my items usually don't require authentication. So I'm no expert on that, and I rather not comment on that. But in general, I would advise to do your research before you list the item and also before you respond on a case to make sure that you're in the clear and that the item is actually authentic. Never list anything that is not authentic, especially when you already know it's not authentic. That's just not a good idea. Of course, there are other very ridiculous scenarios, reasons why people open up cases, and I really look forward to hearing from you guys in the comments down below. What was the most ridiculous case anyone ever opened up against you, and how did it turn out? I have my own little story at the end, but let's continue with some tips and advice. Now, when you respond on your case, I would also recommend including pictures of the listing. So screenshots of your description, screenshots of how the item was categorized, screenshots of your pictures that prove your point and that show that you represented your item accurately. Highlight all the relevant parts. Don't assume that Poshmark is going to go in and look at your listing to verify your claims or the buyer's claims. I don't think that's what they're doing. They will look at the case, and ultimately the customer's king. And if you don't say anything, or if you cannot prove that you accurately represented your item, they might just side with the customer. Is that the end of the world? No, of course not. But again, if you feel like you've been wronged by a buyer, you may want to respond and set the record straight. My next tip, and I think we're on number 7 or 8, I lost count, but my next tip would be go in, say what you need to say, make your case concisely and to the point with pictures if applicable, and then just leave it at that. Yes, there's temptation to go back and forth with the buyer, especially if they keep going on and on and on about whatever it is they're arguing. But you know what? If you just say your piece and leave it at that and leave it to Poshmark, they're the ones looking crazy if they keep going on and on and on. So I have really, for the most part, stuck to this policy myself. I will go in, I will say everything I need to say, make my point, show my pictures, and then I'll just leave it alone. And in almost all situations and scenarios, Poshmark has sided with me, or they refunded the buyer and refunded me as well. So ultimately, I consider that a win. Now, of course, if they sent anything that's fake proof, then I would respond accordingly. So for example, I've seen other sellers show pictures that the buyer submitted of, measuring tape across an item, and it was clear that the item was completely bunched up or stretched out, something like that. Those situations are tricky, and again, I don't work for Poshmark. I can't give you the ultimate answer to how to handle that. But when it comes down to it, do not get personal, do not attack the buyer, be the bigger person, and if push comes to shove, just take your item back and sell it again. One of my very first cases that was opened up against me was when I was 2 weeks into reselling, and it was about a flaw that I hadn't noticed, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't there when I sent it, but I ended up taking the item back, selling it again for a slightly higher amount, so I made a higher profit and everything was good. With the flaw pointed out, of course. My next piece of advice goes hand in hand with that. Know when to fold them. At some point, it doesn't make sense to really fight this person, especially if they're acting crazy. And sometimes it's just better to take the item back. Nobody wins if you have a virtual back and forth argument. I mean, that goes for a lot of situations, not just Poshmark cases. So again, be the bigger person, and also don't dwell on it. Get your item back, relist it, sell it again. If it's sold once, chances are it's going to sell again. Okay, we've made it to the story time portion of this video. Now, the most bizarre case that was ever opened up against me was, I want to say about a year or so ago. It was on a kid's item, a very cute shirt, and I'd mailed it out. I knew everything was fine with it. And I got a case open saying that instead of the shirt, they received a black Banana Republic sweater. Now, I had no black Banana Republic sweaters in my inventory at that time. I did not know what had happened. It was so bizarre to me. So I responded again, very just straight to the point, saying I shipped the accurate item. I've never had a sweater that the buyer describes in my inventory, so I'm not sure what the issue is, but whatever item they received, I did not send that. And I don't exactly remember what they came back saying, and they were very, very polite and very nice about it, but it just got more and more bizarre, and it turned out that, you know, they were not being malicious or anything like that. They legitimately had received that sweater. They sent a picture of it, and so I asked what kind of poly mailer did it come in, because at the time, whenever I sold a kid's item, I was using specific poly mailers for kids items. They were a little bit whimsical, a little bit cute. And so I asked what kind of poly mailer did it come in. So she then sent a picture of the poly mailer and mentioned that, oh, I just realized on the other side of the poly mailer, there was a different label addressed to a completely different person in a completely different state. It wasn't a Poshmark label. And so I kind of reconstructed from that picture and her description that somehow my label must have come off my poly mailer, attached to that poly mailer with an item that was supposed to go to a completely different person from Banana Republic directly, I assume, and somehow ended up on her doorstep. I know it sounds absolutely ridiculous, but looking at the pictures that she submitted and her description, I had no reason to, you know, believe that she was trying to scam me. I mean, it was so ridiculous. The address on that poly mailer that she had received didn't even match her state or name or anything. I thought it was very believable, and I had to laugh about it at some point, and I said, I'm so sorry. I can only assume this is what happened, and Poshmark, please refund this buyer. Obviously, this was a very bizarre mishap, and so Poshmark actually ended up refunding the buyer, but also releasing my earnings. And yeah, it was very amicable. The buyer was very nice about it as well. And it just can happen that sometimes you have a really weird scenario like that. Now, believe me, since then, I check every single label I put on a poly mailer to make sure it's really attached. I think it depends on where you buy your labels from. Some stick better than others. Also, some poly mailers, honestly, I've noticed that the label wouldn't stick to them as well, so I don't buy them anymore. But that's a different story for another day. Moral of the story, I personally do believe, from my experience handling cases on Poshmark from a seller perspective, in my experience, Poshmark appreciates a professional tone. They appreciate when you know how to handle yourself and when you don't go on and on and on about something, wasting their time. Nobody needs to get into a virtual shouting match. I think it's absolutely ridiculous when people do over a piece of clothing or accessory. I am not like that. I also don't fight people at the bins, but maybe you are and that's your jam, and in that case, good for you. But I do think Poshmark tends to favor those sellers who keep it professional, straight to the point, and don't waste their time. Now, I do know from friends and other sellers that they've received very unfair decisions to their cases that were opened up against them. So again, there is absolutely no guarantee here that you can win every single Poshmark case opened against you. And honestly, I hope nobody does open up a case against you. But I do think there are certain ways to minimize the risk of losing a case on Poshmark. Also, I do know there's lots to complain about when it comes to Poshmark, and people have very different opinions on the platform and on cases and how they've been decided, and I'm sure there will be a lot of that in the comments. But ultimately, I do feel that for the most part, as a seller, I do feel protected on Poshmark. I think the fact that I'm giving them 20% of my earnings protects me fairly well. I haven't had any case opened against me where I felt like I was being treated unfairly by Poshmark. The buyers, yes. Poshmark, no. And so, especially when it comes to returns and cases, from my perspective, Poshmark usually handles them very fairly. But again, I know plenty of others who've not had that experience. Some are very good friends of mine who have not had that experience and have documented that on YouTube as well. Feel free to plug your videos down below. You know who you are. Anyway, there are lots of opinions out there, as with everything related to reselling and specific reselling platforms and how to do X, Y, and Z. So I will end on that note. I cannot promise you anything, but I do think those tips might help you, especially if you're new to the platform, if you've just had your first case opened up against you. I think those tips are some good strategies to keep in mind, some general pieces of advice that you can apply to several situations when it comes to handling your business. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you found it helpful. I look forward to reading your crazy stories about bizarre cases in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, please do give it a thumbs up. It really helps me out here on YouTube to get this video out there, get it noticed, and have other people see it too. And also, if you're interested in more content regarding Poshmark, reselling in general, ThreadUp unboxings, and all kinds of other fun stuff, then please do hit the subscribe button and join me here on YouTube. I look forward to seeing you again soon. Bis dann. Tschüss.